I've said before that I don't believe that there's a specific shooting gene for shooting a basketball. But when the question is asked, does genetics or do genes affect shooting? Of course they do. Genes affect everything that we do. And it's not that there's one specific genotype that creates a great shooter or one specific genotype that prevents somebody from becoming a great shooter. But a lot of the underlying traits that can help one become a great shooter are affected by genes. Everything from hand-eye coordination, concentration, body type, height, body composition, limb length, dedication, concentration, ability to focus on one task, tolerance, training tolerance, being a high responder to training, you know, fitness levels. All of these things have some genetic component to them, and all of them affect whether or not you're going to become an elite shooter. And so to suggest that genetics don't play any role in sport performance or play any role in becoming a great shooter, to me is inaccurate. Can you become a better shooter? Sure. With practice, anybody can become better than what they are currently. But that doesn't mean that with a certain amount of practice, one can become a great shooter. If you look at the best shooters in the NBA, they all have somewhat similar body types. They're long, lean athletes, really good body organization, really good coordination, good rhythm, balance, etc. And all of these, while you can practice some of these elements and improve some of these elements, some of it is also genetic, and especially in terms of one's body type, one's height, and limb lengths. Those are fairly genetically predetermined. How tall you're going to be and how long your limbs are and so forth. Body composition as well. So all of these things affect your ultimate ability to perform in a sport or a specific skill. And so discount the fact that genetics play a role, to me, is looking way too simplistic at it. Becoming a great shooter, becoming a great basketball player is multifactorial. It depends on your genetics, it depends on your environment, it depends on your individual traits, it depends on opportunities that you're given. If you grow up with a hoop in your front yard or right down the street from a hoop where you can practice, you're probably going to have a better chance to become a great shooter than somebody who grows up and never has access to a hoop. It's one of the things when I go to Africa, every time I go to Africa, and they're like, well, we just don't shoot as well here. I'm like, well, yeah, because, I had more basketball hoops in my neighborhood than you have in your entire country. And everybody had a basketball. And here, we're scrambling to hope that we can have 2 or 3 basketballs at a practice for 40 or 50 players. It's much easier for somebody growing up with a hoop in their front yard with their own basketball to become a good shooter than it is for somebody growing up in an environment where they're lucky if they ever get to see a basketball, more than once or twice a week, and same with the basket. There's only so much you can do if you're not in that environment. You don't have the opportunity to practice, even if you do have a genetic predisposition to become a good shooter. So environment definitely plays a role, but genetics also play a role. Your individual traits, both mental, psychological type traits in terms of focus, concentration, visual skills. All of these play a role in whether or not you're going to become a great shooter, and all of these have some genetic component. And so combined, all those bits and pieces of genetic influence have a degree of influence on whether or not you become a great shooter. Whether that's 20%, 50%, 70%, I don't know. Genetics is certainly not my specialty. But to discount the role that genetics plays in a shooter, again, I think is misguided. There's nothing you can do about your genetics, and so you are what you've been given. And so now it's, as a player, you just want to make the most of what you have. The most of your abilities, the most of your individual traits that you've been given. But not everybody has the same genetic ceiling, But as a few coaches that I know say, very few players actually reach their genetic ceiling. So, it's not meant to discourage and say, well, this is why you can't be a good shooter. But again, if the question is asked, do genes affect one's ability to become a good shooter? I would just say definitely yes.